You know, sometimes the hardest part of being a parent isn't letting go. It's realizing that the child you raised, the one you've always been there for, is making choices that feel like a rejection of everything you've done for them. You've put everything into their happiness, their success, their future, and then you realize you're no longer needed in the way you thought you were. That's what I felt at my daughter's wedding. I showed up, as any good mother would, but as the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was becoming an outsider. I was pushed to the margins at my own daughter's celebration, until finally, the moment arrived. I was led to my seat, in the hallway. I wish I could say I sat there quietly, a smile plastered on my face, cheering on my daughter as she started this new chapter of her life. But I couldn't. Instead, I left. And what happened next shocked everyone, including me. Be sure to hit the subscribe button for more stories like this. Because sometimes, the truth has a way of revealing itself when you least expect it. The envelope arrived on a Friday morning, its edges crisp and white, the kind that catches the eye before you even realize what's inside. I knew what it was before I even opened it. The weight of it in my hands was enough. There was no mistaking the elegant script, the gold lettering of her name across the front. The invitation to my daughter's wedding. I could feel my heart skip a beat as I slipped my finger under the flap and pulled the card from its confines. The words printed there were beautiful, no doubt about it. The kind of words you'd expect from a wedding invitation, formal, polished, and filled with excitement. But as I read them, a strange mixture of emotions began to swirl inside me. Pride, yes. Of course. This was my daughter, the little girl I had watched grow up. The little girl who had once clung to me with every tear, every fear. Now she was stepping into a new chapter of her life, one that would take her away from me in ways I wasn't sure I was ready for. And then there was excitement. I should have been thrilled, right? This was the day I had imagined for her all those years ago. The day she would find the person she would spend the rest of her life with. But that's where the unease started to creep in. It wasn't just the normal worries of a mother. It wasn't just about the details of the wedding, or whether everything would go smoothly. No, it was something deeper. Something that I had been feeling for months now. Something that I couldn't quite name, but couldn't ignore either. I set the invitation down on the kitchen counter, my hands trembling slightly as I stared at it. I could feel my mind racing. I had always prided myself on being a supportive mother, one who gave her children the space they needed to grow, to make their own decisions. But somewhere along the way, I had started to question my daughter's choices. Her decision to marry him, Kara, hadn't felt right from the very beginning. I knew I was supposed to be excited for her, to be happy that she had found someone she loved. But there was something about him, something I couldn't put my finger on, that made me uneasy. He wasn't a bad person. No, he was charming, friendly, and attentive in all the right ways. But he also had this polished, perfect exterior. And I knew my daughter well enough to see through it. There was a fragility to her that I wasn't sure he understood. A quiet vulnerability that had always made me protective of her, even when she didn't need me to be. As I stood there, staring at the invitation, my thoughts kept returning to the little things. The rushed nature of the engagement. The way she had practically fallen into his arms, without considering the consequences. She had always been impulsive, driven by emotion rather than logic, and I had watched her make decisions like this before. Decisions that didn't always turn out the way she expected. The way she was rushing into marriage with someone she had known for only a few months. It all felt too fast, too soon. But I didn't say any of this to her, of course. I held my tongue, like any good mother would. I smiled, I congratulated her, and I told her how happy I was for her. But inside, a quiet voice had been telling me that something was off. Something about Kara, about their relationship, wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling. I folded the invitation back up, carefully tucking it into the envelope again. I needed some time to process this, time to figure out what I was really feeling. I had always been the kind of mother who believed in supporting her children's happiness, even when it wasn't the path I would have chosen for them. But this felt different. As I walked to the window and looked out over the quiet street, the wind picking up and rustling the trees, I knew something had changed. My daughter was about to start a new chapter of her life, a chapter that didn't include me in the same way it had before, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to let go of the role I had played in her life for so long. Because no matter how happy she was, no matter how wonderful her future seemed, I couldn't shake the nagging fear that maybe this wasn't the life she was meant to have. The day of the dress rehearsal arrived with the kind of frantic energy that only a wedding could bring. From the moment I walked into the venue, I was engulfed in a whirlwind of activity, caterers bustling about, florists arranging bouquets, and the sound of the wedding planner's voice barking orders at everyone. The place was beautiful, no doubt. The soft glow of fairy lights, the delicate draping of fabric, the flower arrangements that filled the air with a sweet, intoxicating scent. It was all coming together, just as it should. But as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slowly being pushed to the edges of it all. My daughter was at the center of everything, of course. It was her day, her moment to shine, and I couldn't begrudge her that. But there was something about the way she moved, so effortlessly through the crowd, laughing with the bridesmaids, exchanging quick words with the photographer, that made me feel like I was standing outside of it all. She looked radiant, the excitement on her face lighting up the room as she tried on the dress, twirling in front of the mirror. I could see how happy she was, and I should have been happy for her, but all I felt was a growing sense of detachment. I watched her as she went from one task to the next, making sure every little detail was perfect. She was so caught up in the excitement, so absorbed in the whirlwind of it all, that she barely had time to look my way. I was standing at the back of the room, out of the way, watching her as she moved through her world, a world that no longer felt like mine. She was slipping away from me, piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop it. The rehearsal itself went by in a blur. The bridal party practiced their walk down the aisle, everyone moving with a precision that felt rehearsed. I couldn't help but notice how much attention Kara was getting. She was the center of it all, and rightly so. But as I stood there, watching, I realized that I hadn't been asked to do anything. No one was turning to me for advice. No one was seeking my opinion. They didn't need me. It was like I had been quietly erased from the picture, replaced by the people who had come to stand beside her in this new chapter of her life. At one point, I tried to speak with her, to ask her how she was feeling, to offer some reassurance, but she was already caught up in a conversation with one of the bridesmaids. She barely acknowledged me, her smile distracted as she made a joke about the flowers or the seating arrangements. I nodded and smiled back, trying to suppress the tightness in my chest. This wasn't her fault. She wasn't intentionally shutting me out. But the truth was there, lingering between us, unspoken. She was moving forward, and I was being left behind. The rest of the rehearsal passed in a blur of noise and movement, with me standing at the edges, watching it all unfold. I wanted to be happy for her. I truly did. I wanted to be excited about the wedding, about the future she was about to step into. But all I could feel was a quiet ache, a gnawing sense of loss that I couldn't shake. It was like I was watching my daughter become someone else, someone I wasn't sure I recognized anymore. As the evening came to a close, I helped gather the last of the decorations and stood with a few other family members, waiting for the night to end. I didn't want to be resentful. I didn't want to feel like a stranger in my own family, but as I watched her smile at Lucas, I couldn't help but wonder if she had already left me behind, if this wedding, this day that should have been about us, about our family, was really the start of something much bigger, something I wasn't a part of. Later, when everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the quiet of the house, staring at the invitation again. It felt like the last connection I had to the daughter I thought I knew. And as the house grew still, I couldn't help but wonder if the woman who had once been my little girl was gone, and if this wedding was only the beginning of a new kind of goodbye. The days leading up to the wedding felt like a blur, each one passing with a pace that left me barely able to catch my breath. The excitement was palpable, of course. Everyone was bustling about, finalizing last-minute details, and making sure that everything would be perfect for the big day. But as I walked through the house, moving between the wedding preparations, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was subtle at first, a quiet unease that I tried to brush off. But as the days wore on, the signs became harder to ignore. There were the small things, the way Kara seemed distracted, as if her mind was somewhere else while the rest of the world was focused on the wedding. She would smile and nod, engaging with the wedding planners, but I could see it in her eyes, a kind of distance, as if she were somewhere far away, lost in thought. There were moments when I tried to talk to her, to ask how she was feeling, but she would brush me off quickly, her responses curt and almost mechanical. It was as though she was on autopilot, going through the motions without truly being present. But it wasn't just her. There were the little shifts in the family dynamic too. During family gatherings or casual moments in the house, I began to notice how little attention she paid to the people around her. She would walk right past me, her eyes scanning the room for something, or someone, else. I wasn't sure if it was just wedding stress, or if there was something deeper at play, but it unsettled me all the same. It wasn't like her. My daughter had always been attentive, always made time to check in with me, especially when she was anxious or overwhelmed. But now, it was as if she had become a stranger in her own home, and that scared me more than anything else. Then there was Lucas. He had always been easy to get along with, charming even, in the way he would ask about my day or take the time to make small talk with me. But lately, he seemed different. There was an edge to him, a tension in the way he interacted with the rest of the family. He was polite, but there was a certain coldness in his eyes whenever I caught them. He was distant, almost as if he were trying to distance himself from the rest of us, from the family he was about to join. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but every interaction with him left me feeling a little more uneasy. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my tea and glancing over some last-minute wedding details, I overheard a conversation between Kara and Lucas. Their voices were low, but the tension in the room was palpable. It was one of those conversations you know you're not supposed to hear, but somehow can't help but overhear anyway. The words were muffled, but the tone was unmistakable. Lucas sounded irritated, and Kara was quieter than usual, her voice soft, but firm. It wasn't the kind of conversation a couple should be having so close to their wedding day. There was something in the air between them, something unspoken, that made me feel like an intruder in my own home. I tried to dismiss it. It could have been nothing, right? Just pre-wedding nerves, the stress of everything coming together. But the more I thought about it, the more that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach grew. What if it wasn't just nerves? What if there was something wrong? Something I wasn't seeing? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was hard to ignore the mounting tension that had settled over the house in the days leading up to the wedding. As I watched Kara move through the final stages of her preparations, her excitement was still there, but it was tempered with something else, something I couldn't quite name. I tried to talk to her about it, to ask how she was really feeling, but every time I did, she would redirect the conversation, change the subject, or simply smile and assure me everything was fine. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that everything was exactly how it should be. But deep down, that voice in my head kept whispering, "Something is off." I had spent so many years protecting her, shielding her from the things that could hurt her. But now, it was as if I were standing on the outside, watching her slip away into something I didn't fully understand. Was it just my protective instincts at play? Or was there something more, something real, that I needed to confront before it was too late? The thought lingered, like an unanswered question that I didn't know how to ask. But one thing was certain: I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. Something was wrong, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could pretend that everything was fine. The night before the wedding was quieter than I had expected, a strange kind of stillness that settled over the house like a heavy blanket. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next day to arrive. The house, usually full of noise and bustle, seemed to hum with a quiet tension that no one was willing to acknowledge. I spent the evening pacing between the kitchen and the living room, tidying up small details, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging, trying to distract myself from the thoughts swirling in my mind. Dinner with my husband was subdued, the silence between us thick in a way that felt both comforting and unsettling. He had been so focused on the logistics of the wedding, making sure everything was in place, that he hadn't noticed the change in me. Or maybe he had, but he didn't know how to ask about it. We ate in silence for a while, the clink of silverware the only sound that filled the space between us. "Are you okay?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. His voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it, a quiet concern that had been building over the past few days. I could tell he was sensing the distance between us, the growing unease that neither of us had dared to confront. I hesitated, the words hanging in the air. "I'm fine," I said, my voice flat. "Just a little overwhelmed, I guess." He didn't push me, but his eyes were filled with that familiar mix of concern and helplessness. He knew I wasn't telling him everything, but he also knew when to leave me to my thoughts. He was used to it. After a while, I put my fork down, my appetite having long since faded. My thoughts began to spiral back to when Kara was a little girl, when the world was so much simpler, and I was her whole universe. I could still picture her as if it were yesterday, her chubby little hands clutching mine, her face lighting up with a smile that made everything feel like it was going to be okay. I remembered the first time she took her first steps, how I had cried from sheer joy, how we had celebrated the small victories together. But somewhere along the way, things changed. It wasn't a single moment, but a slow shift, like the gradual fading of light at dusk. The more she grew, the more she pulled away. The more I tried to protect her, the more she resisted. And now, as I sat there across from my husband, the reality of it all hit me. I had raised her, yes, but I hadn't really known her in years. Not the way I used to. My husband reached for my hand, pulling me from my thoughts. His touch was familiar, grounding, but it didn't stop the flood of memories that rushed in. "She's still our daughter," he said softly. "She's just growing up." I nodded, but the words didn't settle in the way I needed them to. Growing up. It sounded so simple, so easy, but it didn't feel that way to me. It felt like something was slipping through my fingers, something I couldn't hold on to anymore. I had spent her whole life protecting her, guiding her, trying to keep her safe from the world. But now, I was watching her walk toward a future that didn't seem to include me. A future where I was no longer the person she turned to for guidance, for comfort. She had found her own path, her own voice, and I wasn't sure where I fit in anymore. "Do you ever wonder where we went wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question I had asked him before, but the thought had been eating away at me. Had we done enough? Had we given her everything she needed? Or had we somehow missed the signs, missed the moments where we should have stepped in, should have said something? He paused, his face thoughtful. I don't think we went wrong, love. She's always been her own person. Maybe we just didn't know how to keep up with her as she grew. His words didn't bring me the comfort I had hoped for, but they did bring some clarity. Maybe it wasn't about going wrong. Maybe it was just about growing apart. I had tried to hold on so tightly, to be the mother I thought she needed, that I had missed the fact that she was already becoming someone else. And now, the woman she was about to marry was taking my place in her life, and I wasn't sure where that left me. We finished dinner in silence, the weight of everything unspoken hanging heavy between us. I wanted to believe that tomorrow would be different, that the wedding would somehow bridge the gap that had been growing between Kara and me. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't just about the wedding. This was about a change that had already happened, one that I couldn't undo. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. As we cleared the table and sat down on the couch, my mind kept drifting back to Kara, to the way she had seemed so far away in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Was she really ready for this? Or was she rushing into something she didn't fully understand? I didn't have the answers, and I wasn't sure I ever would. But tomorrow, when I saw her in that dress, walking down the aisle toward Lucas, I knew that everything would change, whether I was ready for it or not. The morning of the wedding was a blur of activity, but in the back of my mind, there was only one thought I could hold on to. This was it. The day I had been waiting for months. The day that my daughter, my little girl, would stand at the altar and commit herself to another person. And yet, as I stood there in front of the mirror, adjusting the hem of my dress, there was an emptiness in me I couldn't quite explain. Something wasn't right. Something had been building in me for weeks, and now, as I prepared to walk into the hall where everything would unfold, it was impossible to ignore. I had always imagined this day would be different, full of excitement, full of pride, but instead, I felt like an outsider in my own life. I watched as the bridal party buzzed with energy, laughing, exchanging stories, excited about what was to come. The sound of their voices filled the air, but I couldn't seem to find my place in it all. Kara was surrounded by her friends, her bridesmaids, and even though I was only a few feet away, it felt like a world apart. Her face was lit up with that smile I had known since she was a child, the smile she used to wear when she would look at me, trusting that I had all the answers. But now, as I stood at the edge of her world, I couldn't help but feel like she had already moved on, already left me behind. The moment I stepped into the hall, it hit me harder than I expected. The grandeur of the place, the white linens draped over tables, the flowers that filled every corner of the room, it all looked so perfect, so carefully arranged. But as I looked around at the family and friends mingling, laughing, I felt like a ghost, floating through the crowd unnoticed. Everyone was so absorbed in the joy of the occasion, in the celebration of Kara's new life, that it was hard to find my place. I had always been at the center of things, or at least I had thought I was. But today, I felt like an outsider in a place I should have been a part of. I moved through the crowd slowly, smiling at familiar faces, exchanging pleasantries, but the conversations felt hollow, like I was saying all the right things, but not really connecting with anyone. Even my husband seemed distant, caught up in the hustle of the day, his attention diverted by the endless tasks and the guests arriving. As I watched him disappear into the crowd, I felt more alone than ever. Kara was nowhere to be found, and as much as I told myself it was just pre-wedding nerves, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was avoiding me. It wasn't like her, and yet, there she was, surrounded by people she barely knew, and I was left standing on the fringes. I looked toward the altar, imagining what it would be like to see her walk down the aisle, her dress flowing behind her. I had been dreaming of this moment since the day she was born, but now that it was here, it felt like a stranger's dream. It wasn't just the wedding, though. It was everything that had led up to this day, the little things I had noticed, but never dared to speak of. The way Kara would retreat into herself, the way her distance grew with each passing day. I had tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just wedding stress, just the normal tension that comes with such an important day. But now, as I stood there in the middle of the room, surrounded by people who seemed so joyful, I realized that it was more than that. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about something deeper, something I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. As the guests continued to mill about, chatting, laughing, the music began to play softly in the background, and I felt a pang in my chest. The excitement, the happiness that filled the room, was so far from the unease I was carrying inside. It was like I was watching this perfect picture of my daughter's life unfold, but I wasn't a part of it. I wasn't even sure I was welcome in it anymore. And then, just as I began to let the weight of it all settle on me, I caught a glimpse of her. Kara, standing near the back of the room, looking beautiful in her dress, surrounded by her friends. But for the first time, she looked different. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at anyone. Her eyes were fixed on something far away, and for a brief moment, I saw the girl I used to know, the girl who used to need me for everything, disappear into the woman she had become. It was then that the realization hit me, sharp and undeniable. I had lost her. Not in the way that mothers fear when their children grow up and move away. No, I had lost her to something deeper, something I wasn't sure I could find my way back from. As I watched her, I knew that tomorrow, when she walked down that aisle, everything would change, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. The moment I was shown to my seat, it felt like everything stopped. The excitement, the chatter, the music, it all faded into a distant hum as the usher led me down the corridor, away from the main hall. My heart dropped in that instant, though I tried to smile, to mask the unease that had been building in me all day. I followed him, my heels clicking on the marble floors as he gestured to a small row of chairs tucked in a quiet corner, far from the ceremony, far from everything. "Right here, ma'am," he said, his voice polite but hurried. I looked around, confused, trying to make sense of what was happening. My daughter's wedding, one of the most important days of her life, and I was being led to a seat in the hallway, out of sight, out of mind. I felt the weight of it settle over me like a blanket, heavy and suffocating. I didn't belong here. I didn't belong anywhere in this celebration, not anymore. "Thank you," I said, forcing a smile that felt foreign on my face. He left me there, standing alone in the quiet, the door to the main hall behind me swinging closed with a soft click, sealing me off from the noise, the laughter, the life of the party. I stood for a moment, unsure of what to do next, staring at the empty seat in front of me. It looked so out of place, tucked away in this forgotten corner, as if no one had bothered to even think about where the mother of the bride might sit. I could almost hear the words in my head, the ones I'd said to myself so many times in the past few weeks. This doesn't feel right. The sound of the celebration inside carried faintly through the door. Music, laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all came through muffled, like I was hearing it from the other side of a wall. But the hallway was silent, empty. A stark contrast to the life that was buzzing just beyond that door. I sat down, slowly, and folded my hands in my lap, trying to hold myself together, trying to make sense of what was happening. But the emptiness in that hallway, the cold silence, was louder than anything inside. It was the sound of being excluded from the joy, from the day that should have been mine to share with her. My daughter. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, watching the occasional guest pass by, their faces bright and full of life, while I remained an afterthought. The hallway seemed to stretch out endlessly, and with every step I heard from the people inside, I felt further and further away from everything that mattered. My own family, my own daughter, my own place in this moment. None of it was here with me. My mind wandered, as it so often did in these quiet, lonely moments. I thought about when Kara was younger, when she would run to me with arms outstretched, calling for me with that little girl's voice that was full of trust. I thought about the birthdays, the holidays, the late-night talks we'd had. She used to need me, wanted me to be there for every moment of her life. And now, here I was, alone in the hallway, pushed aside as though I were no longer a part of her world. I looked at the door, willing myself to stand, to push open the heavy wood and walk back into the room where the celebration was happening, where my daughter was. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Something about this moment, about everything that had led to it, kept me rooted to the spot. I was afraid of what I might find on the other side of that door. What if she didn't need me anymore? What if I was nothing more than a distant figure in her life now? Someone who wasn't even important enough to sit with the family. As the minutes dragged on, I could feel a lump rising in my throat. I wiped away a tear that threatened to fall, angry at myself for letting it get this far, for allowing myself to feel this small in a moment that should have been full of joy. I tried to compose myself, to stop the silent sobs that threatened to overtake me. But there was no one to comfort me, no one to reassure me that this was normal, that everything would be fine. I was just here, alone in the hallway, waiting for a moment that felt increasingly out of reach. The door to the main hall opened briefly, and I caught a glimpse of Kara, her dress, her smile, the way she moved through the room with such ease, so graceful, so sure of herself. And for a moment, I wanted to rush to her, to pull her into my arms, to tell her that I was still here, that I still loved her with all my heart. But I couldn't move. I couldn't bring myself to step forward, to interrupt the life she had built without me. So I sat there, watching as the door closed again, muffling the world inside. And I wondered, for the first time, if I would ever truly belong again. The longer I sat there, the more the walls of the hallway seemed to close in around me. It felt as though the wedding, this moment that should have been one of the happiest of my life, was slipping further and further out of my reach. I could hear the laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the soft murmur of voices from beyond the door. But none of it felt real. It was like I was watching someone else's life unfold, not my own daughter's. The more I tried to rationalize it, the more the overwhelming sense of being invisible consumed me. I could hear the music start inside, the soft strains of a love song filling the air. That was when the weight of it all settled on me completely. I had spent my entire life making sure my children were safe, that they were protected from the world, that they always knew they were loved. And yet, in this moment, it felt like none of that mattered anymore. My daughter was about to marry someone, and I was here, in the hallway, forgotten. I thought back to all the decisions Kara had made over the years. When she was younger, I had tried so hard to guide her, to keep her from making the mistakes I had made. I had poured so much into raising her, into trying to show her the right path, to teach her about love and loyalty and patience. But somewhere along the way, I had lost her. She had pulled away, inch by inch, and I hadn't even realized it until now. When did it all change? When did I become just another person in the background of her life? The way she had rushed into this engagement, the way she and Lucas had moved so quickly, without taking the time to really get to know one another, had felt off from the start. I had watched her, heard the excitement in her voice as she told me about him, and part of me had tried to dismiss the unease I felt. She was happy. He made her smile in a way that no one had before, and for a while, I told myself that was all that mattered. But then the signs started to show themselves. The small things, the way she would get quiet when we talked about the future, the way she seemed to be in a rush to tie herself to him. And now, sitting here, separated from the family and guests, it was impossible to ignore the feeling that this whole thing had been rushed. The wedding was chaotic. Everything about it, the planning, the timing, the way it all felt like it had come together in such a hurry, left me with an uncomfortable knot in my stomach. I tried to push the thought aside. This was supposed to be a day of joy, of celebration. But as I sat there in the hallway, feeling the isolation seep into every part of me, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. This wasn't the day I had imagined for Kara. I had envisioned a wedding that was filled with love and excitement, a wedding that reflected the woman she had become. But instead, it felt more like a mistake, like a hasty decision made by a girl who hadn't fully realized what she was committing to. The words I had held back for so long, those concerns, those doubts, began to swirl in my mind. Why hadn't I said anything? Why hadn't I spoken up when I felt that something wasn't right? Had I been too afraid to rock the boat? Too afraid to jeopardize our relationship? Now, I was stuck here, alone, unable to change the course of events. It wasn't just about Lucas, though. It was about Kara, about the way she had become someone else without even realizing it. She was so caught up in the whirlwind of love and excitement that she had lost sight of the things that truly mattered. The stability, the foundation, the things that couldn't be rushed into. But how could I say that to her? How could I tell her that the life she was so eager to jump into might not be the life she truly wanted? As the music swelled louder inside, I could hear the guests getting ready for the ceremony. Kara was about to walk down the aisle, and everything was coming together just as it was supposed to. The dress, the flowers, the vows, everything was perfectly planned. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because while everyone else celebrated, I sat in the hallway, invisible, wondering if I had failed her, wondering if I had failed myself. The tears I had been holding back threatened to spill, but I wiped them away quickly. I didn't want to cry. Not now. Not on her day. I wanted to be happy for her, to feel the excitement everyone else was feeling. But instead, I was left with a cold emptiness, the weight of my own concerns pressing in from all sides. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. I wasn't supposed to feel like this. But I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Something was wrong, and I was powerless to stop it. The longer I sat in the hallway, the heavier the weight on my chest became. The silence, the absence of anything meaningful, pressed down on me like a physical thing, suffocating me in its emptiness. I could hear the distant murmur of voices, the soft clink of glasses, and the faint melody of the music from the celebration inside. But it all felt like it was happening in another world, a world that no longer included me. The family was inside, surrounded by friends, enjoying the happiest day of Kara's life. And yet, I was here, forgotten, left to linger on the sidelines like an afterthought. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky from sitting for so long, and walked toward the door that separated me from the celebration. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I couldn't sit quietly in the hallway, watching my daughter step into a future that I wasn't a part of, a future that seemed so far removed from the girl I had raised. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, when I could feel the distance between us, like a chasm that couldn't be crossed. I paused for a moment at the door, my hand resting on the cold metal handle, but then I pushed it open. The noise from the inside hit me like a wave. Laughter, chatter, the sound of glasses being raised in celebration. But none of it felt real. It all felt like a show, a performance I was no longer a part of. I couldn't stand there, couldn't force myself to walk back into that room, to watch Kara take another step away from me. She was about to marry someone else, and I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready to lose her in this way, to watch her step into a life that didn't include me, that didn't need me. All those years I had spent protecting her, guiding her, trying to keep her from making mistakes, and now she was making one I couldn't stop. I had done my best. I had raised her to be strong, independent, to follow her heart. But I hadn't prepared myself for this, the moment when she would walk away, not just physically, but emotionally, into a world where I no longer had a place. The cold wind whipped through my hair, but I barely noticed it. My thoughts were a blur, and I felt numb, detached from everything around me. The weight of it all, the wedding, the strained relationship, the feeling of being left behind, was almost too much to bear. I had always been there for her, always been the one she could count on, the one she turned to for comfort and guidance. But now, it felt like I was losing her in ways I couldn't even put into words. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get away from the noise, away from the expectations, away from the world that seemed to have moved on without me. It wasn't about the wedding anymore. It wasn't about Kara marrying Lucas. It was about the overwhelming sense that I no longer had a place in her life, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find my way back to her. As I walked into the night, the sounds of the wedding faded into nothing, and I was left alone with my thoughts, with the heavy ache in my heart. I couldn't stay, not in that hallway, not in that room. So I kept walking, trying to find something, anything, that would help me make sense of what had just happened. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had already lost her. And the pain of that loss was something I wasn't sure I would ever be able to overcome. The headlights of the car cut through the darkness, the only light in a world that seemed to have closed in on me. The road stretched out before me, empty and endless, and I drove without a destination, my hands gripping the steering wheel, as though it was the only thing holding me together. The car hummed along the highway, the quiet only broken by the occasional passing of another vehicle. I didn't know where I was going, and at that moment, I didn't care. The air in the car felt thick with the weight of everything that had happened. The wedding, Kara, all of it. My mind raced in circles, each thought overlapping the next, too fast and too sharp to catch. I tried to calm myself, tried to focus on the road ahead, but every time my thoughts drifted back to the day, the wedding, the hallway, the way she had walked away from me like she didn't even see me anymore, I felt the ache in my chest tighten, and the tears that I had been holding back for hours began to well up in my eyes. I blinked them away quickly, the road before me a blur of lights and shadows. The steady rhythm of the tires on the pavement should have been soothing, but it only made the silence louder. There was no music, no sound except the occasional breath that escaped my lips as I tried to hold it together. The night felt long, like it stretched on forever, and I wondered if I would ever find the courage to stop, to face the truth that had been clawing at me all day. I didn't want to feel this way. I didn't want to feel like I had been left behind, cast aside in the rush of something that should have been a celebration. But the truth was undeniable. Kara had moved on. She had found a new life, a new future that didn't have room for me. The thought made my stomach twist, and for the first time in a long time, I felt utterly alone. I had raised her. I had given everything I had to make sure she was safe, to make sure she knew how much she was loved. And now, here I was, driving away from the one person who had once been my whole world, not even sure what my place was anymore. I had always known that one day, Kara would grow up. I knew that she would find her way, that she would build a life of her own. But this was different. This wasn't just about her moving forward, stepping into her future. It was about her leaving me behind, about me realizing, with a cold certainty, that my place in her life was no longer as significant as it had been. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling heavier than the last. My heart ached with the weight of everything I couldn't change. The wedding, the rush, the distance I had been feeling for months. It all felt like a cruel reminder of how much had shifted in such a short time. It wasn't supposed to be this way. She wasn't supposed to be so far away. I wasn't supposed to be a stranger in her life. But as the miles stretched on, I couldn't ignore the truth. She was happy. She was where she was supposed to be, with Lucas, starting her new life. And as much as I wanted to hold on to the idea that I could somehow fit into that life, that I could somehow be a part of it, the reality was clearer than I was willing to admit. There was no place for me there anymore. And no matter how much I wanted to fight it, I couldn't force her to need me the way she once had. A mixture of relief and sadness flooded through me as I drove, the relief coming from knowing I had escaped the suffocating silence of the wedding, the sadness coming from the undeniable fact that I had walked away from something I would never get back. I tried to focus on the road, to breathe through the knot in my throat, but it felt impossible. The tears were close again, but I couldn't let them fall. Not now. Not when I had already made the decision to leave, to walk away. I thought about the life I had envisioned for her. I thought about the years I had spent dreaming of this day, imagining it would be a moment of pride, of joy, of watching my daughter step into the future with all the love and hope in the world. But now, it felt like a farewell, not just to the day, but to everything we had shared. As the car hummed along the empty road, I realized that maybe this was it. Maybe this was her life now, and I was no longer a part of it in the way I once had been. The realization was both terrifying and oddly freeing, like stepping into a void with no clear way out. The future felt uncertain, but there was one thing I knew for sure. I had to face the truth, even if it meant letting go. I parked the car by the lake, the moonlight reflecting off the still water, and for a moment, I just sat there. The quiet of the park felt like a relief from the chaos of the day, but it also amplified the emptiness I felt. The world felt distant, and I wasn't sure where I fit into it anymore. Kara was about to start her life with Lucas, and I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't control. I got out of the car, walking slowly toward the bench by the lake where I had spent so many afternoons with her. The place seemed almost sacred to me, filled with memories of watching her toss stones into the water, of holding her hand as we talked about everything and nothing at all. It was the place where she used to tell me about her dreams, her fears, her hopes for the future. But those days felt so far away now. I sat on the bench, the cool breeze brushing against my face, and stared out at the lake. The world seemed so calm here, so still, and yet inside, I was anything but calm. The silence felt like a refuge, but also like a cage. I wanted to scream, to let the frustration and pain escape, but I didn't. I just sat there, feeling the weight of everything I had lost. Minutes passed, maybe more. I wasn't sure. It was only when I heard footsteps approaching that I realized I wasn't completely alone. I turned to see my sister, Linda, walking toward me. She had always been able to find me when I needed someone, even when I didn't know I needed them. She had always been my anchor, the one person who could make me laugh when I felt like everything was falling apart. But now, As she sat down next to me, I wasn't sure if she could make sense of what I was feeling, or if she even could understand. "Hey," she said softly, her voice low and comforting. "I was worried about you." I gave a small, tired smile. I just needed to get away. She didn't press for more, and for a moment, we sat in silence, the only sounds the rustling of the leaves and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. I could feel her looking at me, as though she were waiting for me to say something, but I wasn't sure where to start. "You know," she began, her voice breaking the silence, "I've been thinking about you a lot today, about how hard this must be for you. But I also know that Kara is making her own decisions now, and that's a part of life. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you. It just means she's finding her own way." I swallowed, the lump in my throat growing. I had heard those words before, but they didn't make it any easier to hear them now. Kara finding her own way. I nodded slowly, but the thought still felt foreign to me, like something I couldn't fully accept. "I know, Linda," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "But it feels like I'm losing her in a way I can't fix. Like I'm being pushed out of her life, and I don't know how to get back in. I thought I was supposed to be there for her. I thought I was supposed to be her safe place." Linda was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the water as she thought about what I said. I could feel her considering my words, weighing them in the quiet of the night. "You were," she said finally, her voice gentle. "You were her safe place, and you always will be, no matter what. But she's an adult now, and she's building her own life. That doesn't mean she doesn't need you. It just means she's figuring out who she is, and that's okay." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that Kara still needed me in the same way, that there was a place for me in her world even now. But everything felt so different. I looked out at the lake again, the water smooth and undisturbed, just like the world seemed to be when I was with Kara in those carefree days. But it wasn't that simple anymore. It wasn't just about me needing her. It was about her needing me too. And tonight, it felt like she didn't. "I'm scared, Linda," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I'm scared that this is the end of something, that she won't need me anymore, that I won't have a place in her life, and I don't know how to handle that." Linda reached over and took my hand, her grip firm, but reassuring. "You're not alone, you know, and you'll always have a place in her life, even if it looks different than it did before. You're her mother. Nothing changes that. She's just learning to live her life with someone else by her side. It's not about losing you. It's about her growing into her own future." I closed my eyes, the tears threatening to spill, but I took a deep breath and held them back. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't about me being pushed out. Maybe this was just the natural course of things, the painful, necessary shift that came with letting go. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her words, for her presence. But more than anything, I was grateful for the reminder that I wasn't completely alone in this, even though it felt like I was. We sat there for a while longer, the weight of the night settling around us. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe, just a little easier, as the darkness wrapped around us, both comforting and cold. The ringing of my phone startled me, pulling me from the quiet solace of the night. I glanced at the screen, and my heart stopped for a moment. It was Kara, my daughter. I hadn't expected her to call, not after everything that had happened today. Not after I had walked out of the wedding, left the celebration, and disappeared into the darkness. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this call, or if I even knew how to answer it. I hesitated, staring at the phone in my hand. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to avoid the conversation I knew we both needed to have. But the other part of me, the part that still felt like I was holding on to something, knew I couldn't keep running away. Not this time. I had to face it. I had to face her. Taking a deep breath, I swiped the screen to answer and brought the phone to my ear. Kara? My voice was shaky, almost hesitant, but I couldn't hide it. I didn't know where this conversation was going to go, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Mom? Her voice came through, soft and tentative. I've been looking for you. Are you okay? I swallowed, trying to steady myself. I'm fine, just needed some space, that's all. There was a pause on the other end, a quietness that felt like a weight pressing down on both of us. I could hear her breathing, just a little shaky, and I could tell she wasn't sure how to continue. I wasn't sure how to continue either. Mom, she started again, her voice a little stronger this time. Why did you leave? You were supposed to be there. I don't understand what happened. I could hear her shift on the other end, the silence heavy as she processed my words. I could almost see her, standing in her wedding dress, surrounded by people, but still so distant. I didn't mean for it to feel that way, Mom, she said quietly. I wanted you to be there. I needed you there. I know you did, I replied, my voice softer now, but the hurt still raw. But you don't need me the way you used to. And I don't know how to find my place in your life anymore. You're marrying Lucas, and that's where you belong now. That's where you're needed. And I'm not sure where I fit in all of this. I've spent so much time trying to protect you, to keep you safe, to guide you. And now, it feels like I'm just in the way. There was a long pause. The silence between us felt endless, the tension so thick that it was almost suffocating. I could feel her on the other end, trying to find the right words, but I knew it was hard for her to understand what I was saying. How could she? She was in love, and she was starting a new chapter of her life, one that didn't include me in the way it once had. I don't want you to be lost, Mom, she said softly. I don't want to lose you. But I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it isn't. I know I've been distant. I know I've made mistakes. But please don't walk away from me. I need you now, more than I've ever needed you. The words hit me like a wave, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something other than hurt. There was a glimmer of hope, a flicker of the love and connection we had shared. A reminder that maybe there was a way forward, even if it was different from what I had expected. I'm here, Kara, I said, my voice steady now. I'm not going anywhere, but we need to figure this out. We need to figure out how to be in each other's lives, even if it looks different than it did before. I want that too, she whispered. I want us to be okay. We stayed on the phone for a while longer, talking in quiet tones, slowly working through the cracks in our relationship. And as I sat there, letting her words sink in, I realized something that I had been afraid to admit for so long. The change wasn't just happening to her. It was happening to me too. And maybe, just maybe, we could find our way through it, together. The sun was starting to rise as I sat by the window, the quiet of the early morning stretching out before me like a moment suspended in time. The soft light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows on the floor, and for a brief moment, everything felt still, untouched by the chaos of the past few days. I hadn't slept much. How could I, with everything swirling in my mind? But in the silence of the morning, there was space to think, to reflect on everything that had happened and everything I had been trying to avoid. I thought back to the night before, when she had called me, when the walls between us had finally started to crack. She had needed me, had reached out to me in a way I hadn't expected. And for a moment, I had felt the glimmer of hope that maybe we could rebuild, that maybe we could find our way back to the connection we once had. But even as I held on to that hope, I knew deep down that things would never be the same. She had made her choice, and I had made mine by walking away. Maybe that was the hardest part, to come to terms with the fact that I may never fully understand or accept her choices. I had spent so much time trying to protect her, to guide her down the path I thought was best, that I had forgotten to trust her. I had forgotten that she was her own person, capable of making her own decisions, of forging her own way in the world. As I sat there, watching the sun rise higher in the sky, I realized that the only thing left for me to do was to accept it. To accept that Kara was living her own life now, and that it wasn't my place to control it. I didn't have to understand everything. I didn't have to agree with her choices. But I had to respect them. Because it was her life to live, not mine. The tears that I had been holding back finally spilled over, not in anger or frustration, but in acceptance. I had done my best. I had loved her with everything I had, and now it was time to let her go, to let her find her own path. The world outside the window was coming to life, the birds beginning to sing, the first rays of sunlight casting their glow over everything. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe. It wasn't the way I had imagined it, but maybe that was okay. Maybe this was how it was supposed to be. It was time to face the truth, no matter how hard it was to accept. Kara's future wasn't mine to shape anymore. And that was the way it was meant to be. The drive back to the wedding venue for the wedding party felt like I was walking into a storm. It had been days since I walked away, leaving behind a scene that should have been full of joy, but instead felt like a page torn out of my life. The silence between Kara and me had been heavy, the kind that fills every corner of your mind with doubts and questions that you're too afraid to ask. The reality of what had happened, what I had done, hadn't fully hit me until now. I thought about the phone call we had, how it had felt like a lifeline, and how the words she had said to me were both comforting and painful. It was as if she was reaching out, but at the same time, still holding me at arm's length. I didn't know what I expected when I returned. Part of me wondered if I was making a mistake, walking back into a space where I no longer belonged. But another part of me, one that was scared and vulnerable, knew I couldn't stay away forever. I had to face the consequences of my actions. I had to see Kara again, even if it meant facing the coldness that I knew was waiting for me. When I stepped out of the car, the first thing I noticed was the change in the atmosphere. The lights, the decorations, the music. It was all the same. But somehow it felt foreign, almost like a world I had been locked out of. I stood there for a moment, unsure of whether to walk back inside, to rejoin the crowd, or to turn around and leave again. My heart was pounding in my chest, the air around me feeling thick and suffocating. I gathered the little courage I had left and walked toward the entrance, where I was immediately met by a familiar face. My brother Thomas looked at me with a mix of disbelief and coldness. His eyes narrowed. The warmth that used to be in his gaze was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite place. "You came back," he said, his voice tight, as though he had been bracing for this moment. "I didn't think you would." "I had to," I replied quietly, my voice shaky. I didn't want to leave it like that. I had to face her. Thomas stepped aside without saying another word, his expression hard, and I walked past him into the hall. The buzz of conversation, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, everything was just as it had been before. But it felt different now. It felt like I was intruding on a celebration that no longer included me. I moved through the crowd, trying to keep my head low, hoping that no one would notice the crack in my heart that had been growing since the wedding. I saw some of our relatives, their glances lingering on me with a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't place. Some of them nodded, but most of them avoided eye contact altogether. It was as if I were invisible again, like I wasn't supposed to be there, like my presence was an inconvenience. It stung, but I wasn't surprised. I had left. I had walked out on my daughter's wedding, and now I was paying the price for it. I made my way through the room, my eyes searching for Kara, but she wasn't in sight. I hadn't expected her to be, not after everything. I felt the weight of every step, the distance between us growing with each passing moment. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw her. She was standing by the bar, talking with a few guests, her back to me. I stood still for a moment, just watching her, trying to find the right words, trying to summon the strength to face her after everything that had happened. She had always been so strong, so sure of herself. And yet in that moment, I could see something else in her. A vulnerability, a hesitation that mirrored my own. When she turned and saw me, her face softened, and for the first time since the wedding, I felt like she wasn't so far away. She walked toward me slowly, her expression unreadable, but the way she moved, the way her eyes met mine, told me everything I needed to know. She was conflicted. She wasn't sure what to say to me, how to handle this strange, uncomfortable moment between us. "Mom," she said, her voice quiet, almost tentative. "I wasn't sure if you would come back." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing. "I didn't want to leave things like that," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I've made mistakes. I shouldn't have walked out. But I couldn't sit there anymore, watching you step into your life without me." Kara looked at me, her eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I could see the pain that mirrored my own. The tension between us was palpable, and the silence stretched out between us, heavy with all the things we hadn't said. And in that moment, for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the glimmer of hope. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the way I had imagined it, but it was something. We were still standing, still reaching for each other, even when it felt like we were too far apart. The room felt quieter somehow, as if the whole world had paused for a brief moment, giving us the space to breathe, to exist in the uncertainty of where we were. But for the first time, I didn't feel completely lost. The room around me felt like it was closing in, the walls pressing against my chest as I watched Kara from across the hall. She was surrounded by the people she had chosen to stand beside her, laughing, smiling, absorbed in the joy of her wedding day. But it was too much. The way everything seemed to be moving forward without me was like a constant reminder that I no longer had a place in her life. I had come back to the wedding. I had tried to fix things. But now, the weight of the silence between us, the things we had left unspoken, felt too heavy to ignore any longer. I couldn't take it anymore. The uncertainty, the distance, the fear that maybe we had drifted too far apart for anything to be the same again. I couldn't hide from it. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay when it wasn't. Not anymore. I made my way across the room, my steps slow but determined. My heart was beating in my throat, but I didn't stop. She looked up when she saw me approach, her expression shifting from a smile to something more guarded. I didn't give her a chance to say anything. I couldn't. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, my voice tight, the words coming out before I could stop them. "Why didn't you tell me that I wasn't welcome?" Kara's face faltered, her eyes flickering with surprise, maybe even a little guilt. But she didn't speak. She just stared at me, the silence stretching between us like an abyss. I felt the anger, the hurt, the years of pain I had buried inside rising to the surface. I should have been there for you, I continued, my voice shaking now, the years of unspoken words flooding out. I should have been sitting beside you, proud of you, watching you take this step. But instead, I was shoved into a hallway. I wasn't even invited to the wedding in the way I should have been. I didn't even recognize the person standing in front of me. Her face crumpled at that, and for a moment, she looked like the little girl I used to hold in my arms. But the look didn't last long. The walls she had built up over the years rose again, and she took a step back. "Mom, I didn't," she began, but I couldn't let her finish. I needed to say this. I needed to get it out. "You didn't what, Kara?" I asked, my voice louder now, the years of frustration bubbling over. "You didn't realize how much it hurt me to see you walk down that aisle, knowing that everything about that day was about you, except for me? You didn't realize how much it hurt to see you pushing me out, like I was nothing more than a stranger." She recoiled, her eyes wide, hurt flashing across her face. I had said too much. I knew that. But the truth had been choking me for so long that I couldn't keep it inside anymore. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, her voice cracking. I wanted to be happy. And I thought you'd be happy for me. I never wanted to make you feel like you didn't matter. But things are different now. I'm different." The words hit me like a slap. I took a step back, feeling like I was falling into an abyss. "I know," I said softly, the tears welling up in my eyes. "I know you're different. I just don't know how to be a part of your life when it feels like I'm losing you." We stood there, facing each other, the rawness of everything between us too much to ignore. It wasn't just the wedding. It wasn't just the distance that had grown between us. It was everything we had failed to say to each other over the years. And as I stood there, my heart breaking, I realized something. This conversation, this painful, ugly, necessary conversation, was the beginning of something. Maybe it wasn't the end we had hoped for, but it was a step towards something new. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The room was thick with tension, both of us standing there, too quiet for too long. I could see Kara's hands shaking at her sides, the weight of everything that had been left unsaid hanging between us. She hadn't spoken in a few moments, and the silence that stretched out made my heart race with anticipation and fear. There was more she wanted to say. I could feel it, but I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever was coming next. "I need to tell you something," Kara said finally, her voice barely a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken promise. "Something you won't expect, but you need to hear it." I stared at her, confused, unsure of what she meant. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, as though she were bracing herself for the fallout of what she was about to say. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tight, still filled with the anger and hurt that had been building inside me since I first walked into that hall. She paused, her throat tightening, as if the words were stuck there. I waited, my breath catching in my chest. I wanted to tell her that it was okay, that we could figure this out, but something in my gut told me that whatever she was about to reveal would shatter everything I thought I knew. "I've been keeping something from you," she said, her voice so soft now that I could barely hear her. "Something that's been eating away at me for a long time." I didn't know what she meant. I thought about the wedding, about the way she had been so certain of everything, so determined to make this day perfect. I had assumed that was all there was to it, her growing up, moving on, building a life. But now, I wasn't so sure. My heart began to pound as the silence stretched on, both of us standing there, suspended in time. I don't know how to explain it, but I've been hiding things from you, from everyone. For a while now, she continued, her eyes never leaving mine. I thought I could carry it on my own, but I can't anymore. Not with everything that's happened. Not with how things have changed between us. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the words, trying to anticipate what she was going to say next. Kara, what are you talking about? My voice was steady, but my pulse was racing. I'm pregnant, she blurted out, her words rushed and frantic. I was going to tell you. I swear I was. But things got complicated, and I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain it without everything falling apart. The shock hit me like a wave, and I felt the ground beneath me shift. Pregnant? I couldn't process it at first. My mind couldn't make sense of what she had just said. All I could do was stare at her, my mouth dry, as my heart pounded in my chest. She was pregnant, and I had no idea. The words echoed in my mind, each one a sharp realization that I had missed something so important, something so fundamental. My daughter, my little girl, the one I had watched grow up, was about to become a mother herself. But why hadn't she told me? I didn't want to disappoint you, she continued, her voice trembling now. I didn't want you to be upset with me. You've always wanted what's best for me, and I thought if you knew, you'd be disappointed in me for getting myself into this situation. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to tell you. So I kept it to myself. I took a step back, my head spinning, the weight of what she had just said crashing down on me. It wasn't just the fact that she was pregnant. It was everything. Everything she had been hiding from me. The walls she had built between us. The way I had been shut out of her life without even realizing it. You kept this from me? I asked, the hurt in my voice now unmistakable. For how long, Kara? How long were you going to let me walk around not knowing about this? How could you not tell me? She flinched at my words, her eyes welling up with tears, but she didn't look away. I didn't want to hurt you, she said quietly. I didn't want you to think I was making a mistake. But I'm not. I'm not making a mistake, Mom. I love Lucas. And we're going to figure this out. But I needed you. I needed you to know, even if I didn't know how to say it. Her words hit me harder than I had expected. This wasn't just about the wedding or her marriage to Lucas. It was about the bigger picture, the fear that had been brewing between us, the cracks that had been forming for years, that now felt impossible to ignore. She was growing up. She had been growing up for so long, and I had missed it. And now, this revelation, was the final truth. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening, and fought back the tears that threatened to spill. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I whispered, my voice cracking. Why did you have to keep this from me, Kara? I would have been here for you. I always would have been. I didn't know how to ask, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to fix the things between us. And I didn't want to lose you even more than I already had. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything we had been avoiding. The truth was out now, raw and painful, but in some way, it felt like the first step toward something real. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. But maybe, just maybe, it was a start. And as I stood there, facing the reality of what had just been said, I realized something. We weren't broken. Not completely. There was still a chance for us to find our way back to each other, even if it meant starting over, even if it meant facing the mistakes we had made along the way. The celebrations continued around us, a celebration still in full swing, yet the air felt different now. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, all of it felt distant, like it was happening in another world, a world where I no longer fit. Kara and I stood apart, separated by the rawness of our conversation, both of us trying to navigate this new space between us. The shockwaves from the truth she had revealed still hung in the air, thick with unspoken words, but neither of us was sure where to go from here. I stood off to the side, watching the guests mingle, the bride in her gown, the way everyone seemed to be so focused on the celebration. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of displacement. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of our lives, but it was impossible to ignore the chasm that had opened between Kara and me. The hurt was too fresh, too raw, and the years of miscommunication, the walls we had both built, now felt like an insurmountable divide. I saw Lucas across the room, his eyes briefly meeting mine. His face was full of smiles, but there was something in his gaze, something uncertain, something that spoke volumes. He didn't know what to do either. How could he? This wasn't just about his wedding anymore. It was about the family that had been torn apart in the process, the relationships that had fractured under the weight of so many unspoken truths. I caught a glimpse of Thomas, standing with a few of the relatives, his arms crossed over his chest. His eyes flickered toward me, and then he looked away. I couldn't tell if it was disappointment or anger, but it was clear that the strain between us had reached its breaking point. There were no words left to say, no explanations that would make it right. The wedding, the event that was supposed to bind us all together, had instead pushed us further apart. Kara didn't look at me again. She stayed busy, talking to friends, laughing with Lucas, throwing herself into the whirlwind of the night as if it were a distraction from everything that had happened between us. I understood why. She was doing what I had done for so long, pretending everything was okay, pushing down the discomfort, the tension, the cracks in our relationship that we had both ignored for too long. But it was all too real now. The damage had been done, and it couldn't be undone. I wanted to reach out to her again. I wanted to make it right, to find the words to tell her that I was still here, still fighting for us. But the truth of the matter was, I didn't know how to fix what was broken. I didn't know if we could rebuild what had been torn apart, even if we both wanted to. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I watched as Kara danced, her smile forced, her eyes never meeting mine. I saw the way Lucas held her, his arms around her waist, and something deep inside me felt at peace. Sometimes, healing isn't about going back to the way things were. It's about moving forward, learning, and accepting that the people we love are evolving, just as we are. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the true connection lies. Not in perfection, but in the willingness to grow together. It's never easy to face the truths we've been running from, especially when it comes to the ones we love most. Thank you for listening. If this story touched something in you, or if you've found yourself in a similar situation, type "still here" in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. There's always more to explore, more to learn, and more to understand about the relationships that define us. Remember, the truth has a way of finding us, but it's how we respond to it that shapes our future.